Before Olympus, before the gods, there was only a silent void, a shapeless darkness without direction or time. From this nothingness, chaos breathed the first thought of existence. Chaos divided itself into light and shadow, giving birth to Gaia the earth and Uranus the sky. Together they formed the first boundary above and below creation and confinement. From them came titans, colossal forces that carried the weight of creation itself. But with power came rivalry, and even among immortals, the seed of rebellion began to grow. Uranus feared his children, locking them in the pit of Tartarus to keep his throne unshaken. Yet fear always creates its opposite, defiance. In the shadows of this world, Gaia shaped a blade from stone and whispered to her sons, "Who will end the tyranny of heaven?" Only the youngest Cronus answered. The strike that followed was not just an act of violence, it was the first law of power. Every ruler, no matter divine, carries the pattern of their own downfall. As Uranus fell, the sky trembled and the sea turned red, and from his wound, new forms of life emerged. Even destruction, it seems, can create beauty. The world of gods began not with peace or order, but with chaos dividing itself to understand its own meaning. And in that act of rebellion, Olympus was born. From the silence of void came the first story, a myth written in thunder, blood, and time. The gods were not created to rule. They were created to explain why we seek power at all. This is the logic of Olympus, where immortality begins with chaos and ends with the understanding of it. Power never begins with peace, it begins with defiance. In the dawn of myth, rebellion was not sin, but the only path toward balance. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, watched the sky rule the earth with fear. Uranus, his father, locked away his children, mistaking control for stability. But control breeds resistance, and resistance becomes destiny. Gaia, the mother of all things, whispered to Cronus that even gods must bleed to understand justice. With the stone sickle she forged, Cronus rose against his father. One swing divided heaven and earth, and history repeated its first betrayal. Yet in his victory, Cronus inherited the same curse he once defied. Prophecy declared that his own son would overthrow him just as he had done. To escape his fate, Cronus devoured each of his children. Power, it seems, consumes not its enemies but itself. Rhea, his sister and queen, watched in silence as her children vanished. But silence too can rebel quietly, crafting salvation from despair. She hid her youngest Zeus and offered Cronus a stone wrapped in cloth. He swallowed it whole, never realizing that deception can be the most divine weapon of all. Zeus grew in secret, raised by the will of the earth itself. From that hidden cave came the sound of thunder, the next rebellion being born. When Zeus rose to challenge his father, it was not vengeance that guided him. It was the law of cycles, the logic that no order can last without chaos testing it. Cronus fell and the Titans with him. From the ashes of that fall, a new pantheon took its place, the Olympians. The rebellion was complete, but the pattern remained. Because every god, no matter how powerful, carries the same question: when will I fall? Zeus rose from rebellion not as a hero, but as a consequence of it. He was the storm that balanced the chaos his father created. His thunderbolts were not symbols of justice, but of dominance. Every flash of lightning reminded gods and men who truly held control. Yet Zeus's rule was built on the same fear that doomed Uranus and Cronus. He conquered chaos, but never escaped it, because power always imitates what it destroys. Hera, both wife and sister to Zeus, ruled through jealousy and pride. But her rage wasn't weakness, it was the emotion that enforced divine order. She punished infidelity not for love, but for law. In Olympus, devotion was less about affection and more about hierarchy. Hera's vengeance against mortals reflected the cruelty of cosmic justice. To her, betrayal was not a personal wound. It was a crack in the fabric of power itself. Beneath the calm of the sea, Poseidon carried storms that mirrored his soul. His trident wasn't just a weapon, it was the pulse of nature's anger. When mortals defied him, he answered not with reason, but with waves. Because the ocean, like its god, exists to remind the world that control is an illusion. Poseidon's wrath gave birth to monsters, but also to myths. In every storm, humans saw their reflection power without purpose. Athena was born from the mind of Zeus, not from love or birth. She was thought, given form, pure intellect without corruption. Her olive tree defeated Poseidon's waves because wisdom endures where violence fades. She proved that creation can be sharper than war. Yet even Athena's reason had its cruelty. For in her logic, mercy was rarely rational. Thrown from Olympus for his imperfection, Hephaestus fell into the sea and rose with fire. His exile became the forge that shaped the god's greatest weapons. His hands, scarred by creation, built beauty from pain. Every hammer strike was vengeance turned into art. Even his mother's rejection became his masterpiece. Because sometimes being unwanted is the source of divine innovation. Born from sea foam and blood, Aphrodite was chaos disguised as desire. Her beauty united gods and destroyed them just as easily. Love under her rule was not sacred, it was a test of weakness. Those who adored her soon learned that obsession is just worship in disguise. Aphrodite's smile promised paradise, but delivered truth, that every longing heart eventually becomes its own punishment. Ares was war without strategy, instinct without thought. He was not loved by gods, only feared by mortals. Yet even chaos needs a guardian. Ares reminded Olympus that peace is never permanent, it only pauses between battles. In his shadow, humanity learned its darkest lesson. That courage and cruelty often share the same face. Apollo embodied reason, music, and prophecy, order shaped by harmony. His light didn't just reveal truth, it exposed weakness. He healed diseases but also created them, proving that control demands balance. To hold power over life, one must also understand death. Through his oracles, humans sought meaning from silence. But every answer came with a question: can logic save the soul? Artemis ruled the wild, untouched, free and merciless. Her purity wasn't innocence, but independence from the world's corruption. She punished those who invaded her solitude, even by accident. For to see a goddess uninvited was to violate the sacred boundary of self. In her moonlight, mortals found both comfort and terror, because freedom, like Artemis, demands distance to survive. Dionysus was the god of wine, chaos, and sacred ecstasy. He tore down walls between gods and mortals through intoxication. His followers danced not for joy, but to dissolve identity itself. Madness to him was simply truth without the limits of reason. In his festivals, chaos became communion. Humanity met the divine not through prayer, but through surrender. Hermes moved between worlds, messenger, thief, and trickster in one. He proved that speed is not escape, but evolution. His winged sandals carried secrets across heavens and underworlds alike. Information was his weapon and deception his art. In Hermes, we see the first god of communication and the first warning of misinformation. Because words like gods can save or destroy. When Persephone was taken to the underworld, Demeter's grief froze the earth. In mourning, she created winter, a season carved from absence. Yet Persephone returned each year, bringing spring with her. Their story became the first myth of hope that even loss is cyclical. Death and rebirth were not opposites, but companions. And through them, mortals learned that love can defy even the gods. Hades ruled the underworld not as punishment, but as protection. He guarded the souls of the dead from the chaos of the living. His silence was not cruelty, it was order beyond emotion. In his darkness, every soul found truth stripped of illusion. Hades' realm was not hell, it was the balance that made Olympus possible. Because immortality means nothing without an end to measure it. While gods fought and mortals prayed, Hestia simply kept the fire alive. She represented stability in a world addicted to change. Every home that burned with warmth carried her quiet divinity. Because even in Olympus, peace needed a guardian. In the smallest flame, she taught the greatest truth. That divinity isn't always about power, sometimes it's about presence. The gods are long gone, yet their stories still breathe inside us. Because myths were never just about divinity, they were about us pretending to understand chaos. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon. They were not beings but blueprints. Each one embodied the logic of human instinct disguised as eternity. We gave them thunder so we could explain fear. We gave them beauty so we could worship desire without shame. Every myth began as a mirror, a reflection of our hunger to control the uncontrollable. When nature raged, we called it Poseidon. When love destroyed, we called it Aphrodite. The Greeks didn't invent gods, they invented explanations. Olympus was humanity's first philosophy written in stories instead of science. Through Athena, we learned that wisdom has a cost. Through Ares, that conflict is never just war, it's emotion sharpened into motion. The gods taught us that power and flaw are twins born from the same cosmic mother, and that even perfection must fracture to stay alive. When we look at them now, they no longer command, worship only recognition. Because every generation rewrites Olympus with new names, new fears, and new technologies. The divine didn't vanish. It evolved. Today our gods wear the masks of fame, data, and progress, but the logic remains the same. To believe in gods is to believe that stories can explain what equations cannot. That meaning, no matter how fragile, is still worth creating. The myths endure not because they are true, but because they make truth bearable. They remind us that chaos is not the enemy, it's the beginning. And perhaps the gods still matter because they never tried to be perfect. They were simply reflections of what we are, infinite, flawed, and endlessly explained. Every story begins with creation, but every creation ends with silence. Even the gods, for all their thunder, could not escape the stillness that follows meaning. The Titans fell. The Olympians faded. Not because they were defeated, but because humanity no longer needed to name its fears. We learned to replace lightning with science and prayer, with ambition. Yet the same hunger that built Olympus still burns behind every human invention. Immortality was never about living forever. It was about being remembered long enough to matter. Zeus's thunder now echoes through power grids. Hermes' wings became satellites, and Apollo's light shines in every algorithm that tries to predict our future. The gods are gone, but their blueprints are everywhere, hidden inside our logic, our myths, our machines. They evolved with us, quietly changing names, never truly dying. Because immortality isn't a gift, it's a transformation. What we worship changes form, but never disappears. Every time a child learns the name of a star or a scientist questions creation, the old gods awaken. Not in temples, but in curiosity, the truest form of faith. Olympus was never a place above the clouds. It was an idea that we could find order in chaos, purpose in fear, and divinity in reason. The gods taught us the most human truth of all, that to be eternal, one must first accept the beauty of ending. And so the last immortals fade not in defeat but in peace. Their legacy lives on in every question that begins with why. Because as long as we keep searching for meaning, the gods will never truly die, they will simply change form, explained anew.